The great hall of Silverwood Pack smelled of wood smoke and cowardice. Sienna Thorne stood before the dais where Alpha Garrett held court, her hands resting on the swell of her belly, and watched the faces of wolves who had known her since childhood refuse to meet her eyes. 7 months pregnant with triplets. The weight of 3 lives pulled at her spine, made her ankles ache, and her back scream for rest. But she would not sit. She would not show weakness before these people who had already decided her fate. "You have become a burden on this pack," Alpha Garrett announced, his voice carrying through the silent hall. Gray streaked his beard now, and the years had not been kind to him. Neither had the disappointment of a son who could not keep his promises. "Your pregnancy strains our resources. Your situation brings shame upon us all." Sienna's amber eyes found Derek in the crowd. Her former lover, the father of the children growing inside her, stood with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the floor. He would not look at her. He had not looked at her since the day she told him about the pregnancy, when his face had gone pale and he had asked how she could do this to him. "The children are Derek's," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "He knows this. You all know this." A murmur ran through the assembled wolves. Alpha Garrett held up his hand for silence, and the sound died as quickly as it had risen. "My son has chosen not to acknowledge this claim." The Alpha's words fell like stones. "Without a father to provide for you, without pack resources to spare for a litter of 3, you have no place here." A litter, as if her children were animals, as if she were merely a vessel for inconvenient cargo. "You have until sundown to gather your belongings and leave pack territory," Garrett continued. "May the moon goddess have mercy on you." Mercy. Sienna almost laughed. The goddess had shown her precious little mercy in her 24 years, parents who abandoned her to the pack's orphanage, a lover who vanished the moment she became complicated. And now this, cast out in late autumn with winter breathing down her neck, and 3 babies who would never know the warmth of a pack. She turned without bowing, a small defiance that made Garrett's eyes narrow. Let him be angry. Let them all be angry. She was beyond caring what the Silverwood wolves thought of her. As she walked toward the door, she heard voices behind her, low but not low enough. "She won't survive the winter. Not alone. Not carrying that many. Perhaps that's for the best. Unnatural, triplets. Some say it's a sign of dark magic." Sienna's hands tightened on her belly. She would survive. She would birth these children and raise them to know their worth, even if she had to do it while the world burned around her. The first snow of the season began to fall as she stepped outside, soft and deadly, promising a cold that killed. One day on the road nearly broke her. Sienna had packed what little she owned, a few changes of clothing, her herbalist's kit, dried meat and hard bread that would last perhaps a week. She walked because there was nowhere to go, because stopping meant freezing, because movement was the only thing keeping despair at bay. The forest road stretched before her, empty and white with accumulating snow. Her boots were worn thin, and she could no longer feel her toes. The babies shifted inside her, restless in the cold, and she wondered if they sensed her fear. If they knew that their mother had no plan beyond surviving until the next sunrise. She heard the horses before she saw them. Royal riders emerged from the tree line, their mounts breathing steam in the frozen air. 5 of them, armor glinting beneath heavy cloaks, the silver raven crest of the Northern Territories emblazoned on their chests. They surrounded her before she could decide whether to run or hide, not that her body would have allowed either. "Sienna Thorne!" The lead rider pushed back his hood, revealing a weathered face and kind eyes that did not match his military bearing. "I am Commander Roland of King Phoenix's personal guard. We've been searching for you." Sienna's grip tightened on her walking stick, the closest thing she had to a weapon. Why would the Alpha King of the Northern Territories be searching for a cast-out nobody? Commander Roland dismounted, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded animal. The king has an extensive intelligence network. He learned of your situation and your condition. His eyes dropped to her belly, but there was no disgust in his gaze. Only curiosity. He extends a formal invitation, sanctuary in his court, protection from the winter, a place for you and your children. In exchange for what? A smile crossed the commander's face, there and gone. I am only a messenger. The king's intentions are his own to share. But I can tell you this. He seemed genuinely concerned for your welfare when he dispatched us. Sienna wanted to refuse. Every gift she had ever received came with barbed strings attached. Every kindness hid an agenda that would eventually cut her. But she looked at the snow falling faster now, felt the ache in her feet, and the flutter of 3 lives depending on her choices, and she knew that pride was a luxury she could not afford. I'm not a charity case, she said, even as she accepted Commander Roland's hand to mount behind one of the riders. Whatever the king wants from me, I expect to negotiate terms. The commander's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval. I suspect the king will appreciate that, my lady. He has little patience for those who cannot advocate for themselves. Blackstone Keep rose from the mountains like a fortress born of stone and shadow. Sienna had heard stories of the Alpha King's seat of power, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Ancient walls that had stood for 12 generations, towers that scraped the winter sky, and warmth that rolled out from the massive doors like a living thing when they opened. The great hall dwarfed Silverwood's. Twin hearths roared with fires that could have consumed whole trees, and torches lined walls hung with tapestries depicting wolf hunts and ancient battles. Sienna's legs trembled with exhaustion as she walked toward the dais, but she kept her spine straight and her chin high. She would not limp into her new cage looking broken. King Phoenix Ravencrest rose from his throne as she approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like the warrior kings of legend. Silver streaked his black hair, coming early from stress rather than age, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. A scar curved along his jaw, pale against his tanned skin. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, his features too sharp, too severe, but there was something compelling about him that made Sienna's breath catch. He descended the dais steps with surprising grace for a man his size. His gaze swept over her travel-worn clothing, her wind-chapped face, and finally settled on her swollen belly. Something transformed in his expression. Sienna had expected pity or disgust, the reaction she had grown accustomed to. Instead, she saw hunger, not for her body, but for what she carried. His eyes widened, his lips parted, and for a moment the mighty Alpha King looked like a man witnessing a miracle. "Welcome to Blackstone Keep," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You honor us with your presence." Before Sienna could respond, a small woman with silver-streaked brown hair and ink-stained fingers bustled out of the crowd. She wore healer's robes and carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Out of the way, out of the way. She pushed past Phoenix without ceremony, peering at Sienna's belly with undisguised fascination. Triplets? Truly triplets? In all my years, I've never attended a triplet birth. You must let me examine you. The positioning, the heartbeats. I have so many questions. Healer Margot, Phoenix said, a note of affection softening his stern voice. Perhaps allow our guest to rest before you begin your interrogation. Rest? Yes. Yes. Of course. Margot waved a dismissive hand but did not stop circling Sienna, her eyes cataloging every detail. Chambers have been prepared in the royal wing. Hot baths, proper food, soft beds. We will discuss the medical particulars tomorrow, when you're not about to fall over from exhaustion. Sienna became aware of movement in the shadows near the back of the hall. A man in velvet robes watched her with cold eyes, his graying auburn hair perfectly styled, his expression carefully neutral except for the slight curl of his lip when he looked at her belly. She filed him away for later consideration. One enemy identified. Certainly not the last. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said to Phoenix, the words formal and hollow. "I look forward to discussing the terms of my stay." Something flickered in the king's storm-gray eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who understood that nothing came without cost. "Rest well, Sienna Thorne," he said. "We have much to discuss." 3 days passed before Phoenix summoned her to his private study. The room was smaller than Sienna expected, intimate rather than imposing. Books lined every wall, maps covered a massive desk, and a fire crackled in a hearth sized for comfort rather than show. Phoenix stood at the window, watching snow fall over his kingdom, and did not turn when she entered. "Please, sit." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "You must be tired of standing. Margot tells me the weight of 3 children strains the body considerably." Sienna lowered herself into the offered chair, grateful to be off her aching feet. The seat was designed for someone much larger, and she felt small within it, which was perhaps the point. Or perhaps not. She was still learning to read this king. "Your healer is thorough," she said. "She's asked me more questions about my pregnancy than anyone has in 7 months. Phoenix finally turned, his face cast in shadow and firelight. "Margot is fascinated by unusual cases, and triplets are very unusual indeed. So I've been told. Usually in the same breath as being called unnatural or cursed." The king moved to sit across from her, his long body folding into the chair with weary grace. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He carried weight that had nothing to do with his physical form. "What do you know of my kingdom's situation?" he asked. "Very little." Silverwood was not concerned with northern affairs. Phoenix nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then I will be blunt. My population is declining. Every year fewer pups are born. Every year more families leave for territories with better prospects." He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "I have had 3 potential queens. All 3 died before producing heirs." Sienna's heart clenched unexpectedly. There was real grief in his voice, not the practiced sorrow of political convenience, but the raw ache of loss. "I have consulted healers, performed rituals, offered prayers to every god and goddess who might listen." Phoenix's laugh was bitter. "I am 32 years old, and I am the last of the Ravencrest line. When I die, my kingdom dies with me." "You believe yourself cursed," Sienna said, understanding dawning. "I know myself cursed. I have never been able to father children. Every healer I've consulted agrees that the failing is mine." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And then I learned of you. A woman carrying 3 healthy pups, cast out by fools who could not recognize a blessing when they saw one." Sienna's hands moved instinctively to her belly. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Marriage. Let me claim your children as my heirs. In exchange, you will have everything: power, protection, wealth, a home for yourself and your children that no one can ever take from you." "And after I give birth? When you have your heirs and no longer need me?" Phoenix's brow furrowed, genuine confusion crossing his face. "I need a queen, Sienna, not a broodmare. I am proposing a partnership that lasts beyond the birth of these children, beyond the raising of them, until death separates us." She searched his face for the lie, for the hidden agenda, for the trap that must be concealed within this too good offer. She found only desperate hope and a loneliness that matched her own. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "This is not a decision to be made lightly." "Take all the time you need." Phoenix rose, moving toward the door. "I will not pressure you. But Sienna?" He paused, looking back at her. "Whatever you decide, You and your children are welcome here. That is not contingent on anything." He left her alone with the fire and her spinning thoughts. That night, Sienna could not sleep. The chambers they had given her were finer than anything she had known in Silverwood. Thick furs covered the bed, tapestries blocked the draught from stone walls, and a fire kept the room warm enough that she could sleep without shivering. But comfort brought its own challenges. Her body, accustomed to vigilance, could not relax into luxury. She rose and walked to the window, looking out over mountains bathed in moonlight. 3 lives stirred within her, restless as their mother. She placed her hands on her belly and felt them shift, tiny bodies jostling for position in an increasingly crowded space. "What should I do?" she whispered to them. "He seems kind. He seems genuine. But so did Derek at first. So did everyone who eventually left." The babies offered no counsel, only continued their midnight acrobatics. Sienna thought about Phoenix's face when he had spoken of his dead queens, the raw grief that no amount of kingly composure could hide. She thought about his eyes when he looked at her belly, the desperate hope he could not quite conceal. She thought about his promise that she was welcome regardless of her answer. No one had ever offered her welcome without conditions before. She returned to bed eventually, though sleep remained elusive. When dawn finally came, she found herself no closer to a decision, but something had shifted in the night. The automatic assumption that Phoenix must be lying had softened into a tentative willingness to watch and wait. Perhaps that was progress enough for now. The weeks that followed tested Sienna's carefully constructed walls. Phoenix visited her chambers every day. He brought books when he learned she loved to read, asked about her health with genuine concern, and listened when she spoke about her training as an herbalist. He never pushed for an answer to his proposal, never made her feel like a transaction being negotiated. He talked to her belly. She caught him at it one afternoon when he thought she was asleep. He knelt beside her couch, his large hand resting gently on the swell where her children grew, and whispered promises to them, that they would never know rejection, that they would grow up loved and wanted, that he would protect them with his last breath. Sienna kept her eyes closed and her breathing steady, but something cracked inside her chest. This man, this powerful king, spoke to her unborn children with more tenderness than their own father ever had. Healer Margot became a constant presence, her fascination with the triplet pregnancy tempered by genuine care. She measured Sienna's belly, listened to 3 heartbeats, and kept meticulous notes that would probably become the kingdom's most detailed medical text on multiple births. But not everything was warmth and wonder. Servants whispered when Sienna passed. Some made signs against evil behind her back. Notes appeared under her door, anonymous warnings to leave before it was too late. She heard the word unnatural more times than she could count, saw the suspicion in eyes that should have been welcoming. And always, in the shadows of court functions, Lord Aldrich Blackwood watched with cold calculation. Lady Catherine Ashford approached her after a particularly tense council meeting where Aldrich had questioned her background for the 3rd time. "You handle yourself well under fire," Catherine said, falling into step beside Sienna in the corridor. "Most women in your position would have crumbled by now." "I've had practice being unwanted." Sienna kept her voice neutral. "It builds a certain resilience." Catherine laughed, a sharp sound of genuine amusement. "I think we shall be friends, you and I. Walk with me. I have information you need to hear." They found a quiet alcove where Catherine laid out the political landscape in blunt terms. Aldrich led a faction of traditionalists who believed only pure Ravencrest blood should inherit. His nephew stood next in line if Phoenix died without heirs. The triplets threatened decades of careful positioning. "He will not give up simply because the king favors you," Catherine warned. "Aldrich plays the long game. He will find ways to discredit you, to make your children seem illegitimate or cursed. And if subtlety fails, he is not above more direct methods." There's something else you should know, Catherine continued, her voice dropping lower. My sources tell me that Aldrich has connections to Silverwood Pack. He's been corresponding with Derek's father for months. Sienna's blood ran cold. Alpha Garrett? The same. They've been planning this for longer than you realize. Derek didn't simply abandon you out of cowardice. He was instructed to seduce you, get you pregnant, and then ensure you were cast out at exactly the right time. Aldrich wanted you desperate enough to accept Phoenix's offer, but also tainted enough by scandal that his faction could use your background to undermine any children you produced. The revelation hit Sienna like a physical blow. Derek's romantic pursuit, which had seemed so genuine at the time, had been calculated manipulation. His sudden coldness when she announced the pregnancy was not cowardice, but the completion of a plan. They expected Phoenix to take you in, Catherine explained. Aldrich has a spy in the king's household who informed him that Phoenix had been quietly searching for pregnant women, potential surrogates who might provide heirs. When he learned of your triplet pregnancy through his Silverwood contacts, he realized you were exactly what Phoenix was looking for. The plan was to let Phoenix claim your children, then use evidence of Derek's paternity and your scandalous background to declare the children illegitimate. Aldrich's nephew would remain heir, and Phoenix's line would die with him. Sienna's hands tightened on her belly. They used me as a pawn in their power games. They used my children. Yes. But now that you know, you can fight back. Catherine's eyes glinted with fierce satisfaction. Aldrich underestimated you. He expected a broken, desperate woman who would never discover the truth. Instead, he got you. The alliance with Catherine changed things. Sienna had always been alone in her battles, relying only on her own wits and stubbornness. Having an ally, having someone who chose to stand beside her for reasons beyond obligation, felt strange and fragile, like holding a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. But Catherine proved reliable. She sent notes about council meetings, warnings about which servants had been paid by Aldrich's faction, and occasional invitations to tea that were really strategy sessions. Sienna found herself looking forward to those afternoons. The sharp wit and practical advice, the rare experience of being treated as an equal rather than a problem to be solved. Margot became another unexpected friend. The healer's fascination with the triplet pregnancy never waned, but it was tempered now by genuine affection. She fussed over Sienna's diet, demanded detailed reports on fetal movement, and kept a journal of observations that grew thicker by the day. "You're making medical history," Margot told her one morning, her eyes bright with scholarly enthusiasm. "The first documented triplet pregnancy in the Northern Territories in over 200 years. Future healers will study these notes." "Assuming we all survive the delivery," Sienna said dryly. Margot's expression sobered. "There are risks. I won't pretend otherwise. But you're healthy. The babies are positioned well, and I've been preparing for every complication I can imagine." She reached out and squeezed Sienna's hand. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we face it together." It was the same promise Phoenix had made. Sienna was starting to believe it might be true. The winter garden should have been too cold for visiting, but the castle's heating stones kept the paths clear, and a bench warm enough for wolves in human form to rest. Sienna went there when the walls closed in too tightly, when she needed to remember that she was free to leave, even if leaving was not something she intended to do. Phoenix found her there one afternoon, walking despite Margot's orders to rest. "You're supposed to be in bed," he said, but there was no reproach in his voice. "I feel trapped indoors." Sienna pulled her cloak tighter against the wind. "I need to move, to remember I chose to be here." Phoenix fell into step beside her, matching his long stride to her slower pace. "I understand that feeling, the weight of duty, of expectation. Sometimes the throne feels like a cage." They walked in comfortable silence for a time, snow crunching under their boots, until Sienna found herself speaking of things she had never told anyone. her parents, who abandoned her, Derek, who promised forever and vanished at the first complication. The loneliness that had become so familiar, she barely noticed it anymore. She watched Phoenix's face carefully as she spoke Derek's name. She had not yet told him what Catherine had revealed. "There's something you should know," she said finally. "About Derek and my pregnancy. About how I came to be here." She told him everything. Aldrich's conspiracy, Derek's seduction on instruction, the plan to use her and her children as pawns in a succession scheme. Phoenix's face grew darker with each revelation, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "They orchestrated your suffering," he said, his voice rough with barely contained fury. "They used you as a weapon against me, against our children." "Our children," Sienna repeated, testing the words. Phoenix stopped walking and turned to face her. "I claimed them the moment I offered you marriage. Whatever blood runs in their veins, they are mine. They are ours. And anyone who threatens them will answer to me." The intensity in his eyes should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safe for the first time in years. Phoenix shared his own losses in return. The queens who died, each one taking a piece of him with her. The guilt of wondering if he had killed them somehow, if his curse extended to those who loved him. The terror of being the last of his line, watching his kingdom fade with no way to stop it. One of the babies kicked, hard enough that the movement was visible through her dress. Sienna gasped, hand flying to her belly, and Phoenix stopped walking immediately. "What is it? What's wrong?" The fear in his voice was immediate and raw. "Nothing." She laughed, breathless. "Just one of them making their presence known. Here, feel." She took his hand before she could think better of it and pressed it against her belly. The baby kicked again, right against his palm. Phoenix's face transformed. The stern lines softened, his eyes widened, his lips parted in wonder. He had never felt a child kick before, Sienna realized. For all his years of trying for heirs, he had never been this close to fatherhood. He laughed, a rusty sound of pure joy that made him look 10 years younger. That's remarkable. Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. When all three of them are active at once, it feels like a battle happening inside me." Phoenix kept his hand on her belly, reverent and gentle. "Hello in there," he murmured. "I'm going to be your father if your mother will let me. I promise I'll do everything in my power to deserve it." Something shifted between them in that moment. The walls Sienna had spent years building began to crumble. Looking at this powerful king, brought to his knees by the feeling of her children moving beneath his hand, she felt something dangerous bloom in her chest, something that felt terribly like hope. That evening, Sienna found Phoenix in his study, staring at maps he clearly was not seeing. "I've made my decision," she said from the doorway. He turned so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. The hope in his eyes was almost painful to witness. This powerful king, reduced to breathless anticipation by a pregnant outcast's answer. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll marry you. Not because I need protection or wealth or a home, though I'm grateful for all of it. I'll marry you because you see my children as a blessing, because you treat me as a partner rather than a transaction, and because—" She took a breath. "Because I'm starting to believe you might actually be the man you appear to be." Phoenix crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "I will spend the rest of my life proving you right." "See that you do." He laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you, Sienna. Thank you." The council chamber fell silent when Phoenix announced his engagement. "Lady Sienna Thorne has accepted my proposal of marriage," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Her children will be my children, heirs to the Northern Territories and all their holdings." Sienna sat beside him at the high table, dressed in borrowed finery that could not disguise the swell of her pregnancy. She watched the reactions ripple through the assembled nobles. Surprise, calculation, and from Aldrich's corner, barely concealed fury. "Your Majesty, I must object." Aldrich rose, his silk voice reasonable and deadly. "We know nothing of this woman's background. The children she carries have no confirmed parentage. To place them in the line of succession would be an insult to 12 generations of Ravencrest blood." Murmurs of agreement came from his faction. Other council members shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to openly oppose either the king or Aldrich's logic. "The children are wolves of good stock," Phoenix replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Their mother has proved herself intelligent, capable, and of good character. I have made my decision." Perhaps Lady Sienna should be questioned about the children's true father. Aldrich's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "Surely transparency is not too much to ask when the future of our kingdom is at stake." Sienna rose to her feet, her voice carrying across the chamber. "Since Lord Aldrich has raised the question of transparency, perhaps we should discuss his own activities regarding these children." Aldrich's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "Then allow me to clarify." Sienna produced letters from her sleeve, documents Catherine had helped her obtain. "These are letters between Lord Aldrich and Alpha Garrett of Silverwood Pack, detailing a conspiracy to manipulate the northern succession. They show that Derek, the biological father of my children, was instructed to seduce and impregnate me as part of a scheme to undermine King Phoenix's heirs." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Aldrich's face went pale, then red with fury. "Those are forgeries," he sputtered. "Obvious fabrications designed to discredit me." "The seals are authentic," Phoenix said, his voice cold as winter steel. "My own spy master has verified them. He also discovered that you used private merchant caravans to carry your messages, bypassing the usual channels we monitor, a blind spot we have now corrected." His eyes narrowed. "You conspired with foreign powers to manipulate my succession, Aldrich. You used an innocent woman as a pawn in your schemes. You endangered children who had not yet drawn breath." "This is outrageous," Aldrich protested, but his faction was already edging away from him, sensing which way the wind was blowing. "I demand a formal investigation, a proper trial." "You will have one," Phoenix agreed. "Until then, you are confined to your chambers under guard. Any attempt to flee will be considered an admission of guilt." Guards moved to escort Aldrich from the chamber. As he passed Sienna, he leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. "This is not over. I have resources you cannot imagine. Your bastards will never sit on my kingdom's throne." Sienna met his eyes without flinching. "They're not your kingdom's bastards. They're your king's heirs. And you made a mistake thinking I would be too broken to fight back." Aldrich was escorted away, but Sienna knew Catherine had been right. This battle was won, but the war was far from over. Sienna threw herself into life at Blackstone Keep with the desperation of someone who had finally found ground worth standing on. She worked alongside Margot in the healing chambers, applying the herbalist training that had gathered dust in her years at Silverwood. Word spread through the castle of the healer queen who mixed remedies for servants' ailments and never asked for payment. She cured a kitchen boy's persistent cough, eased a guardsman's old wound, helped a pregnant maid through morning sickness with ginger and sympathy. The lower castle began to love her. The whispers changed from suspicious to protective. When Aldrich's remaining allies spread rumors about demonic triplets, they were dismissed with contempt by people who had seen Sienna's gentleness firsthand. One morning, she discovered fresh flowers outside her chamber door, placed there by kitchen staff who refused to identify themselves. Another day, the head cook sent up a special meal of all her favorite foods, prepared exactly how she liked them. Small kindnesses accumulated like snowflakes, each one warming her heart. But Aldrich's faction had not surrendered completely. Margot discovered the first real threat. Someone had been tampering with her herbal stores. Compounds that should have helped with labor were contaminated with substances that could cause hemorrhaging. Nothing immediately deadly, nothing that would point directly to an assassin, but enough to ensure complications that might prove fatal. "I've moved everything critical to a locked cabinet," Margot told Sienna, her face pale with fury. "No one touches your medicines now but me." Phoenix doubled the guards around Sienna's chambers and had trusted wolves taste her food before it reached her plate. He spent more time with her, as if his presence alone could ward off threats. Their private dinners became longer, their conversations deeper, until Sienna found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that frightened her. One evening, with candles burning low and a winter storm raging outside, they discussed strategy until the conversation drifted to personal territory. "I'm falling for you," Phoenix said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers across the table. "Not just the idea of you, not just what you represent. You, Sienna. Your wit and your strength, and the way you refuse to let anyone define your worth." Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run and she wanted to stay. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same, and she wanted to protect herself from the vulnerability of admitting it. "I don't know how to trust this," she said finally. "Every time I've let someone close, they've left. I'm not sure I can survive another abandonment." Phoenix reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady, anchoring rather than demanding. "I can't promise I'll never fail you," he said. "But I can promise I'll never stop trying. And I can promise that leaving you is not something I'm capable of. Whatever comes, we face it together." She didn't tell him she loved him, not yet, but she let him hold her hand, and she stopped looking for the door. The message arrived at sunset, written in Catherine's distinctive hand. "Urgent. Come to the old wing. Tell no one." Sienna knew it was wrong even as she gathered a small knife and slipped out of her chambers. Catherine would never ask her to come to an abandoned part of the castle alone. Catherine was too careful, too strategic, too aware of the dangers that surrounded the king's betrothed. She paused at the door, her hard-won caution warring with urgency. If it was a trap, she was walking into it. If it wasn't, if Catherine was truly in danger, every moment of delay could cost her ally's life. A compromise, then. She scrawled a quick note and left it on her pillow where a maid would find it within the hour. "Old wing. Catherine's message. Maybe trap. If I'm not back, send guards." It wasn't much, but it was something. The fear that waiting for help might cost Catherine her life drove her forward, along with the stubborn pride that had kept her alive through rejection after rejection. The old wing smelled of dust and abandonment. Cobwebs brushed her face as she navigated corridors lit only by the single candle she carried. Her babies were still inside her, sensing her tension, hiding from what was to come. She found not Catherine, but 4 men waiting in an empty chamber, and with them, a face she had hoped never to see again. Derek stood in the shadows, his expression a mixture of guilt and cold determination. "Hello, Sienna," he said. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble for my father's plans." The other men wore Blackwood colors beneath their cloaks. Their leaders smiled at her with Aldrich's own cold calculation. The message was convincing, wasn't it? Lady Catherine's handwriting is surprisingly easy to forge. He gestured to his companions. "We're not going to kill you, my lady. That would be too obvious. You're simply going to disappear until after the birth. The children will be raised by Lord Aldrich's nephew as his own heirs, and well, you won't be a problem anymore." "This was the plan all along, wasn't it?" Sienna addressed Derek directly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Seduce me, get me pregnant, abandon me, and then retrieve me when I became inconvenient." Derek had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It wasn't personal. My father needed alliances, and Aldrich offered advantages. You were just a means to an end. I trusted you. I loved you. I know." He stepped closer, something like regret flickering in his eyes. For what it's worth, I didn't expect to feel anything, but it doesn't change what has to happen. Sienna's grip tightened on her knife. They expected her to cooperate, to fold like every other obstacle in their path. They saw a pregnant woman alone and assumed victory was assured. She let them underestimate her. When the first man reached for her arm, she drove the knife into his forearm with all her strength. He screamed, reeling back, blood spraying across her borrowed dress. Sienna screamed too, not from fear, but to summon help, and her voice echoed through the empty corridors with satisfying volume. Derek grabbed for her, but she twisted away. Her pregnant body awkward but her desperation lending her strength. She lost her knife but raked her nails across his face, leaving bloody furrows down his cheek. He cursed and stumbled back. The remaining men rushed her. She fought with everything she had, kicking and biting and screaming. They wrestled her to the ground, rough hands covering her mouth, but they could not silence her before her screams reached ears that mattered. Torchlight flooded the corridor, shouts and running footsteps, the clash of steel, and then a sound that would haunt Sienna's dreams for years to come. Phoenix's wolf was massive, silver-black, and terrifying. He tore through Aldrich's men like they were made of paper, his jaws finding throats with savage precision. The beast's eyes were Phoenix's eyes, frantic and furious, and when the last enemy fell, he shifted back to human form beside her, blood spattered and shaking. Derek lay against the far wall, alive but wounded, staring at the carnage with horror. Sienna, Sienna, talk to me. Phoenix's hands moved over her, checking for injuries, his voice cracking with fear. Are you hurt? Are the babies hurt? I'm fine, she managed, though her dress was torn and her feet bloody from running on broken stone. Pain lanced through her belly. She doubled over with a cry, and Phoenix caught her before she could fall. Margot, he roared. Someone get the healer now. The contractions came in waves as they carried her to the healing chambers. Margot's face was grim but focused as she examined Sienna, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. The babies want to come, she announced. The stress of the attack has triggered labor. With triplets, any complication is dangerous. And labor brought on by trauma rather than natural readiness carries its own risks. We need to keep her calm and give the babies the best chance we can. Phoenix refused to leave. He held Sienna's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and absorbing her pain as if he could take it into himself. Margot worked with quiet efficiency, her apprentices following her every instruction, while Sienna focused on breathing through the waves of pain. The night stretched into eternity. Contractions came and went, each one threatening to bring the babies too soon, each one easing just before the point of no return. Margot administered herbs to slow the labor, applied warm compresses to ease the cramping, and kept up a steady stream of reassurance that belied the worry in her eyes. Your body wants to protect them, she told Sienna during a brief respite. It's fighting to keep them inside until they're ready. We just need to help it along. By dawn, the contractions had slowed to a manageable pace. Margot pronounced the immediate danger past, though she insisted on complete bed rest until the babies decided to arrive on their own terms. You're remarkable, Phoenix told Sienna, still holding her hand, his face haggard with exhaustion and relief. Fighting off attackers and then fighting your own body to protect our children. I've never known anyone with your strength. What happened to Derek? Sienna asked. Phoenix's expression hardened. He's in the dungeons, awaiting trial alongside his accomplices. His father has been summoned to answer for Silverwood's involvement in the conspiracy. I want to see him. Before the trial. Phoenix studied her face, then nodded slowly. If that's what you need. 2 days later, guards escorted Sienna to Derek's cell. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by the stone walls and iron bars. The scratches she had left on his face were scabbing over, red lines against pale skin. Sienna. He rose when he saw her, moving to the bars. I didn't know they were going to hurt you. The plan was just to take you somewhere safe until after the birth. Safe. She laughed bitterly. You call being kidnapped by armed men safe? I never wanted this. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything you say. You used me, Derek. You made me love you as part of a political scheme. You watched me be banished into winter while pregnant with your children, and you said nothing. My father gave me no choice. Aldrich offered our pack alliance, protection, resources. All I had to do was seduce and abandon a woman who trusted you. Yes, I understand. Sienna stepped closer to the bars, close enough to see the guilt swimming in his eyes. I came here to tell you that I forgive you. Derek's eyes widened in shock. You forgive me? Not for your sake, for mine, and for our children's. She placed a hand on her belly. They will grow up knowing they were wanted, that they are loved, that their worth was never in question. They will know their father by blood was a weak man who chose ambition over integrity. And they will know that true family is not about blood, but about choice. Sienna, Phoenix will raise them. They will be Ravencrests in every way that matters. And you will spend the rest of your life knowing that you threw away something precious because you weren't brave enough to choose love over fear. She turned and walked away without looking back. Behind her, Derek called her name, but she did not stop. That chapter of her life was closed. The council chamber felt different 2 days later. Sienna had not fully recovered from the attack, and her body still ached with the strain of stopped labor, but she insisted on being present when justice was served. Aldrich stood in chains before the assembly, his perfect composure finally cracked. His nephew stood beside him, pale and terrified, no longer so eager for a throne bought with blood. Derek and Alpha Garrett completed the row of prisoners, Silverwood's humiliation complete. Lady Catherine laid out the evidence with surgical precision. The forged message, the contaminated medicines, the men who had confessed to Aldrich's orders before dying of their wounds, the long campaign of whispers and sabotage that could only have come from someone with access to the highest levels of court, the letters proving Silverwood's complicity. The defendants are guilty of conspiracy against the crown, attempted kidnapping of the queen-to-be, and endangerment of the royal heirs, Phoenix announced when the evidence concluded. The sentence is exile. Lord Aldrich Blackwood and his nephew are stripped of their titles and lands. They will be escorted to the borders of the Northern Territories and forbidden to return on pain of death. He turned his cold gaze to Garrett. As for Silverwood, while your pack has long operated with autonomy, all packs within the realm ultimately answer to the crown in matters of treason. By conspiring against my heirs, you have invoked that authority. Alpha Garrett of Silverwood is stripped of his title, his pack placed under royal protection until new leadership can be established. Derek Garrett is banished from all territories allied with the Northern Crown. Aldrich's eyes blazed with fury. You're making a mistake. That woman and her bastards will be the end of the Ravencrest line. Everything I did was to protect this kingdom from— Remove him, Phoenix said. Guards dragged Aldrich away, his protests echoing through the corridors until distance swallowed them. Derek went quietly, his eyes finding Sienna one last time before he was led through the doors. Phoenix's hand found hers under the table, warm and steady. It's over, he said quietly. They can't hurt you anymore. Sienna nodded, but her eyes were on Catherine across the room, the ally who had intercepted the forged message and raised the alarm. On Margot, who had stayed by her side through every crisis. On the servants and guards and courtiers who had chosen her side when it mattered. She had not won alone. She had found a place where people fought for her, where her worth was recognized, where she finally belonged. The thought brought tears to her eyes that she refused to shed in public. Later, she promised herself. Later, she would let herself feel the magnitude of what she had gained. 1 week after the conspirators' exile, Sienna's waters broke. The labor was long and brutal, triplets presenting complications that made even Margot's experienced hands tremble. But Sienna fought with the same stubborn determination that had carried her through exile and politics and assassination attempts, and Phoenix never left her side. "You're doing so well," he said between contractions, his own face pale with fear and wonder. "Just a little longer. They're almost here." The first baby came with a cry that echoed through the healing chambers. A girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would turn amber like her mother's. Phoenix wept when he held her, actual tears streaming down his warrior's face, and he did not bother to hide them. "Rain," Sienna gasped between contractions. "Her name is Rain, for the storm that brought us together." The second came faster. Another girl, smaller but with lungs that could wake the dead. She screamed her arrival to the world, and Sienna laughed through her exhaustion because the sound was so gloriously, defiantly alive. "Stella," Phoenix said, his voice thick with emotion, "for the stars that guided you to us." The third was stubborn, a boy who seemed reluctant to leave the warmth of his mother's body. Margot had to coax him out with patient hands and worried mutters, but when he finally emerged, he was the biggest of the three, with eyes that held flecks of both amber and gray, as if he had already decided to claim both his parents as his own. "He needs a name that speaks to who he will become," Sienna said, looking at Phoenix. "Not who he might have been." Phoenix held his son, looking down at the tiny face with overwhelming love. "Rowan. For the tree that stands strong through any storm. For resilience. For endurance. For the ability to bend without breaking." "Rowan Ravencrest," Sienna said, testing the name. "I like it." "They're perfect," Phoenix breathed, holding all three while Sienna lay exhausted but triumphant. "Sienna, they're perfect. You're perfect. I don't have words for what you've given me." 3 royal heirs, Margot announced to the waiting crowd outside. 2 princesses and a prince. All healthy, all strong. The castle erupted in cheers. Bells rang from every tower, but inside the healing chamber, there was only the quiet miracle of a family born from rejection and hope. Sienna reached for her children, and Phoenix placed them in her arms one by one, 3 small bodies, wrinkled and red and perfect. 3 lives that had been called curses and burdens, now cradled against a mother who had never stopped believing they were blessings. "Thank you," Phoenix said, his voice rough with emotion. "For them. For letting me be part of this. For giving me hope when I had none left." Sienna looked at him, this king who had seen her worth when everyone else saw her burden, and finally let herself say the words she had been holding back. "I love you." His smile was sunrise after endless winter. "I love you too. All 4 of you. Forever." Spring came to Blackstone Keep like a promise fulfilled. The wedding was set for the first day of summer, but Sienna felt married already. She shared Phoenix's chambers now, their children's nursery adjoining their room so that every cry reached them instantly. The triplets thrived under the constant attention of their parents, Margot, and approximately half the castle's population. She found Phoenix in the nursery one evening, watching their children sleep. "I still can't believe they're real," he said when she joined him. "I spent so many years convinced I would die without heirs, that my line would end with me. And now there are 3 of them, and you, and I don't know what I did to deserve any of it." Sienna leaned into his side, and his arm came around her shoulders automatically. "You deserved it by being the kind of man who saw a pregnant outcast and thought blessing instead of burden. That seems like a low bar for worthiness. You'd be surprised how few clear it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching 3 small chests rise and fall in the soft light of moon and candle. Somewhere in the castle, a servant sang a lullaby. The mountains outside stood dark against a sky brilliant with stars. "I'm still afraid sometimes," Sienna admitted. "I keep waiting for it all to disappear, for you to realize you made a mistake, for the council to turn against me, for something to take this away." Phoenix turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "The fear may never fully leave, but I will never stop trying to prove it wrong. Every day, for the rest of our lives, I will show you that you belong here, that you are wanted, that your worth has never been in question." "That's a lot of days. I'm a patient man." She kissed him then. Properly kissed him with all the love she had spent months denying and finally allowed herself to feel. He kissed her back with reverence and passion and the desperate gratitude of a man who had given up on happiness until it walked into his great hall with 3 babies growing inside her. When they finally broke apart, one of the triplets stirred. Rain, the firstborn, opened eyes that were turning amber like her mother's and let out a small, questioning cry. "I've got her," Phoenix said, and crossed to the cradle with the ease of practice. He scooped up his daughter, murmuring nonsense words that somehow soothed her back toward sleep, and Sienna watched him with a full heart. She had been told she was too much, a burden, unwanted. She had believed it for so long that it became part of her foundation, a truth she built her survival around. But Phoenix had seen her differently from the beginning. Her children had not been complications to him, but miracles. Her sharp tongue had not been a flaw, but a treasure. Her entire self, from her herbalist hands to her stubborn pride, was exactly what he needed. She crossed to stand beside him, reaching down to adjust the blanket around Rain. Phoenix shifted to make room for her, and they stood together over their sleeping children, 2 broken people who had somehow found each other and become whole. "I never thought I'd have this," she said quietly. "A home, a family, someone who sees me as I am and wants me anyway." "I never thought I'd have this either." Phoenix pressed a kiss to her temple. "But we do. Against all odds. Despite everything trying to stop us, we do." On Sienna's finger, the ring he had given her caught the candlelight. It was not ornate or ostentatious, just a simple band of silver set with a single amber stone. But it was solid and real, like the life she was building here, like the future stretching out before them. The fear would never fully leave. Sienna knew herself too well to believe in fairy tale endings where all wounds healed and all shadows vanished. But standing in the nursery with Phoenix beside her and their children sleeping peacefully, she allowed herself to believe in something better than safety. She believed in home.